Greetings. So I recently watched a video. I occasionally watch a guy whose channel is Tabletop Family, and he goes through his sort of DMing journey as he runs a game for his wife and his kids and their friends and his friends and so on, right? And he seems like a newer GM, and it's very much a roller coaster of oh, this went well, this went poorly. And it's sort of interesting just to see someone who's, I think, relatively new, or it seems like they're relatively new to the hobby, just to sort of see their universe and how it all plays out in with them in their head. Um, and he most recently posted a video saying, now I understand why DMs quit. And he was just talking about sort of a his perceived lack of interest that folks had, or their lack of commitment to the game. People being on their phones or coming in late or leaving early, like that kind of thing. And it was very interesting. And I didn't want to clog his comments up with my diatribe, so I thought that I would. It just got me thinking though, and so and I'm not responding directly to his video. I am sort of responding to things that I have come across and felt, over my many years. And so let's have at it. So first thing is, with respect to the idea. So the first thing he said was, I feel like I'm putting in a lot more to the game than my players are putting into my game. And I mean, the answer is yes. 100%, you are absolutely going to feel like you put more effort into your game as a GM than your players. And the fact of the matter is, you probably do. You're probably putting in prep, you're probably thinking about it a lot more. The expectation for them is that they show up, maybe with a writing implement, maybe they remembered their character sheets, right? And they show up. And sometimes you might have a little more or less, right? You might go, hey, I got some homework for you, or I occasionally send text messages and say, look, I need you to send me a paragraph of something, or your stats, or right, something that I need to prep that game. But I'm still prepping the game. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still bearing that mental load, as it were. And I just think, to be honest, this is just something you need to understand, that you signed up for, and that you have to accept. You've decided to GM, and you are not, by doing that, you are not solely responsible for people's fun. I think that is a myth that sucks and makes GM's life harder, but you are certainly the most responsible. By agreeing to GM, you've said, hey, look, I will take on the prep, I'll create the situations for you, and see how you react to them. You're not responsible. I'm not responsible for your fun. But if we're having a dinner party, you've agreed to set the table, kind of. You've agreed to lay out the table and set the table. That absolutely is the case. And there's no there's a couple ways around this, and we'll talk about those in a second. But I do think this is just something to get over. Like, if you're like, well, they're not putting as much into it as I am. I mean, yes, absolutely true. You sort of asked for this. This is sort of your job. Same thing when you teach a class, or what, you are absolutely putting in more effort than your students are doing. Give a presentation, you are absolutely putting in more work than the audiences do. That's absolutely the case. That is the case, 100%. You've just got to learn to accept that and figure out how to live with that. Now, you can mitigate that, right? There's a couple ways to mitigate that. One is to do less prep, 100%, since a lot of what we're talking about is prep time, really. That's a lot of the effort. Don't prep as many things. We've talked about this a tiny, tiny bit. Steal maps from existing sources. Use generators. Don't write more about NPCs than you absolutely need to. If you're not going to use an NPC more than once, don't write anything about them. Even for recurring NPCs, you can get away with 2 or 3 sentences, something like that. reuse stat blocks for a generic enemy, and then so this is a cheat that I do, and it's terrible, by the way. I should never say this out loud because my players will now know that I'm doing this. I use a generic stat block for certain enemies. I just go, okay, they are going to be like this. They're going to be a little weaker than the PCs. They're going to have this kind of hit points, blah. Then when combat time comes and I say, well, there's 8 of them, I now have a stat block. When those guys get attacked, or when I am going to move them, I will then make a quick decision and go, that guy is the big heavy guy. That guy has the big sword. He's going to do a little more damage and he won't maybe hit or block as well, but he's like +3 damage. And that gives him a thing immediately. And I'll either do it, sometimes I'll really cheat and I'll just do it based off the miniature that I picked out for the guy. Oh, that guy has a giant sword. That's giant sword guy. Done. Or sometimes I'll just have, I'll swap out the mini, or sometimes I just won't, and I'll just have to write down who is who. But this guy has the big shield. He's a +2 armor class. This guy has a net. First time I attack, I'm going to try to net somebody. And that's what I do. So I don't have to write all those stat blocks. You have to be able to improvise that combat. You have to know your system well enough to be comfortable making that call. I wrote the system. Even in 5e, I think you could probably wing some of that, right? Shield guy has +2 armor class. Big guy has +3 damage. Maybe you give him -1 to hit. Net guy, he has his first attack has to hit, and then you have to save versus Dex or be trapped, immobilized, maybe even grappled, that kind of thing, right? Done. And then that's what I do. I do that for lots of different types. Now, you can't do this all the time. Some combats have to be big and special and set pieces, and I think you should plan them more. But if you're just doing pocket full of ninjas, right? Oh, things are flagging. Let me pull out ninjas. Goblins in a fantasy game or whatever. You can do this. Pull out the generic stat block, modify it on the fly. Done. And you can do that. Alternately, and I did. I haven't gotten through it yet, but I bought Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, and I'm going through just to see. And I think most of this, for me, I think I already do most of these things. Definitely a book that if you are new to GMing, maybe you think about picking up and looking through. And it has a lot of tips. And primarily the tip is don't prep stuff you're not going to use. Prep things that make the game easier to run. But I'm going through. Prepare what benefits your game is literally the first sentence of the book. So, one way is to do less prep. Another way, alternately, switch to a game. Now, switching a game obviously has a cost, so be careful. But you can switch to a game that requires less prep. If you're running Pathfinder First Edition, I guarantee you 5e is less prep, 100%. Guarantee it. If you were running 5e, I guarantee you that the majority of OSR games are going to be less prep. You run Shadowdark versus 5e, you're going to do less prep. Guarantee you. The game is just, those games are designed in that order. Run a game that's collaborative storytelling game. I would never do this. That's not my gig. But if you have a game that is collaborative storytelling over tactical combat, you're gonna probably do less prep, because a lot of the prep in a lot of your tactical combat games centers around getting the combat, getting the rewards together, you have sort of that balanced game that you need to create, and that's the combat game. And we run a dungeon world, I bet you're doing less prep than even an OSR game. And again, I don't necessarily advocate this. There's a cost to switching games, because presumably you're playing a game you want to be playing. But system does matter when it comes to prep time. So, maybe that's an idea. Another way to do it would be to Just change your campaigns. Well, so okay, so let's hold on one second because um, so yeah, so that addresses prep time. I'm sorry, I just mentally fuzzed out there for one second. But let's talk about his. So another concept would be the characters are people aren't coming, or people are coming late, or they're leaving early, right? So that's another sort of danger that you run into, and we've had this too. And one thing that I've absolutely I've not quite done. There's a thing that I don't typically do and a thing that I do typically do here. So I'll give you the thing I don't do first. That is choose a campaign structure that favors episodic content versus long serial plot lines. I love a long serial plot line. So it's hard for me to give that up. But if you're running a game that's Star Trek Next Generation versus game that's like Game of Thrones, you're going to have an easier time fitting people in and out because it's episodic. If the storylines can wrap up in a night or two versus being these long, convoluted, months long plot lines, you're going to have an easier time working people in and out. Make your campaign. Oh, it's a police procedural in the fantasy world. Bam. Everything goes. You get a mystery. You wrap it up. Investigation. There's a fight at the end. You're done. Jimmy wasn't there this week. He missed that, but he didn't miss anything germane to the entire campaign. If you're running a deep political campaign that plots will go on for months and months and months, you're going to have a harder time, and Jimmy's going to miss stuff. And then when he comes back, he's going to be checked out because he doesn't know what has happened. And so you can ease your and your player's burden as they flop in and out of the campaign and leave sessions early or whatever, if you have a campaign structure that more easily allows people to just swap in and out. The second part to this is to be flexible and ready to change focus. If you have important, so even if you're running that long standing campaign with plot lines that go for months and months, just be ready to delay, to change, to if So we recently had a thing that the guy that's running the Noble, who runs a third of this town, is like, yeah, we're not gonna be able to make it these next few weeks, and that derails a lot of the plot points. He essentially hires the party to go do things. That's a player character. Mostly built a lot of the meta campaign around this guy. And him not being there is a big blow. So we just have to change the focus. And how do you do that? You just have to have a backup plan, right? And so as soon as he told me this, I started working on my backup plan. One backup plan would be to have him agree. Is it okay if you're an NPC sometime, and I will just get that way I can still give the plots out. I can still move the story forward. You won't make any big decisions as to running the kingdom until you're there, but I'll still have plot lines moving forward and still missions for the players to go on. Another is simply to, switch the focus. So instead of that noble giving the orders, the church now starts to give the orders, something of that nature. You can just delay, move to a B plot. Have a one-shot ready. Have a module in your back pocket that you go, okay, these guys aren't going to be there tonight. Let's run Into the Unknown. And you might want to be flexible with your time and your continuity when you do this. And this segs into my last one, which I do. This is the one I do. This last one right here. I allow people to come in and out at any time. We didn't used to do that. We used to really, really twist into a pretzel over, oh, is your character there, even if you're not there, and who's going to run you, and what the heck, how does that work? And the answer is, I don't do that anymore. Don't do it at all. Continuity be damned. If you leave, your character disappears, poof, and we don't even talk about it. It's not a thing. I don't have to write you out of the story. I don't have to have someone run your character. You just absolutely, you are not there. When you return, you appear. There's no, how did you get to the middle of the dungeon? You haven't been here the past, whatever, the past 2 hours, but all of a sudden, now at the big boss fight, you're here? Yes. Don't care. I don't care about the continuity. It doesn't make any sense. We're trying to, in this case, we are accommodating the players. And so the story doesn't make as much sense, obviously, but we don't care because we now have accommodated folks that had a reason to be late or couldn't show up last week or whatever. Done. We just hand wave it and they're there. And the same thing when I said, moving plot points or having a one shot module in your pocket. Don't worry about the damn timeline. If the party was on their way to confront the enemy and then of some one of the player of the paladin, and the paladin's not there next week, pull out your one shot and say, we're gonna put that on hold and you'll go right back there when we're done, but we're gonna run the three of you through this module tonight because that guy's not here. Done. I don't worry about the timeline. This is a flashback episode or a dream episode or whatever the hell. Don't care. Just move it, and then when the guy comes back, you flip back and done. But yeah, when people coming in and out, I mean, that's just something that we have had to deal with more and more as people, grew into adulthood, had kids, etc. Their schedules become a little more chaotic. Definitely allowing people to drop in and out, boom, has saved me a lot of hassle and a lot of hand wringing and just don't do it. Continuity is actually second priority. The first priority comes to making it as easy as possible for your players to be there when stuff happens in the game and to not be there when they're not going to be there. Another thing that the tabletop family dad talked about was lack of interest, distractions, people on their phones or wanting to play video games or whatever. I mean, this one's tough, of course. It can be a motivation killer for GMs. Like, I personally hate when people pull out their phones during a game. It drives me a tiny bit nuts. I get that we are permanently on our phones now, as in 2024, but it sort of tells me that you're just not paying attention, and it's not just me that you're not paying attention to. You're also not paying attention to the other players as they try to do the things they're doing, and I think that is sort of your responsibility as a player, is to be interested in the other players' stuff. I think that's super important. So I'm not a big fan. And so and I had these points written down, but I'm actually looking to swap points around here a little bit. So one thing is going to be, and this sort of segs into the previous point too. So that's why I'm putting it here. If you're playing with people that are different ages, different family situations, different backgrounds, whatever you want to call it. I do think that there's a point where you have to realize that not all of your players are in the same stage of life as you. So, for instance, if you're playing with your kids, then there has to be a point in time where you think, okay, I'm glad that I don't know how old anyone's kids are, but let's say my 12-year-old son is playing with us. That's cool. However, at some point, he's going to realize that he wants to go hang out with his buddies more than he wants to hang out with his dad. And that's natural. Or he wants to go play video games so he can put on his headphones and go berate people for being bad at Call of Duty. Like, that is natural. That's a natural thing. We just have to understand that is something that's going to happen. And it's nothing against you. It just is. And that could be that's almost any age. There's a point at which, especially if you're playing with your kids or you're playing with other people's kids, my son was late 20s, And all of a sudden, so they're in a different stage. The stage where all his friends get married and all of his significant others' friends start getting married, and or they start getting invited to weddings. Weddings happen on weekends. We play on weekends. So at some point, he's just like, well, I got to disappear for 3 weeks in a row because we got wedding and blah and right and so on, or parties or whatever. And in fact, at some point, he just dropped out of the game because he's at a different life stage. He's at the stage where his focus is on his significant other and their relationship and their friends and their social world. Nothing against the game. I mean, sure, if my game was awesome, maybe there's no there was no way that was going to continue. Um, he has to do his own thing. It just absolutely is. So, and I think there's a little bit to be said about allowing players to come in and out with this, like my previous sort of set of points. And there's a little bit of lack of player interest and distractions. I think if you're playing with young kids, you have to expect that young kids are going to potentially be distracted by all the things that we have cleverly thought up to distract them. So if your thought is, oh man, my kid would rather be playing video games, you're probably not wrong, and that's probably okay, because frankly, a new video game is cooler than dad and his old friends. It's not a slight against you. It's not speaking to your game. It's just speaking to the fact that um, you're at a different stage of your life and your attention span and your interests than those that are younger than you or potentially older than you, right? I think you have to let that one play out. Um, the one thing that I have sort of come to grips with is that different players at different times will have different levels of interest in your game or what you're in, and that could be minute to minute or it could be week to week, right? Plot to plot, campaign to campaign. Different players will vibe with different things to a more or less degree. That's a personal thing on their point. I always find that what you should try to do, find and this is when I was presenting, when I taught, when I GM. At any one given time, there probably is someone. If no one is interested, you are indeed doing something wrong. You should correct that. But if you're doing it correctly, at least one of your players is interested in what's happening at that second at the table. You have to lean into that. Find that person, lean into that. Don't pay attention to that guy who's a little distracted. Pay attention to this guy over here because he is buying what you're selling right now, and so go with that. Um, and again, that you can take that to any time scale. Um, Obviously, your goal should be to engage as many of the players as possible as often as possible, and so you should always be shooting for that. But if you notice that, well, this guy is not paying that much attention, but these two over here are, focus on them for a while. Just give them the focus. And then maybe once you vibe a little bit with them, you go over here and say, well, what do you think? Or what are you going to do? And try to then pull them back in. I said different people are interested in different things. And then once you learn that about your players, what they are interested in and what is going to hook them, then you can use that trick, right, to try to grab people. So I do know that I have one woman in the game, and she likes that stupid, like, romantic side plot, and she loves a good, just plain old fight. So you can throw those out. Um, some other guy likes a puzzle, right? You know what I mean? This guy is very much into his role playing with NPC. You can throw those bits out there, but at any given time, and this is as much for your sanity as much as it is to be a better GM. Find the guy or the person that is interested in what you're doing at that moment and lean into them. I think finally, because again, I didn't want this to go too long. A couple points. And one is, it's still. I hate to say it's just a game. It's still just a game. And there was this. When I watched the video, he's like, I have to continue this. I have to continue it for my kids or my family. This is family time, and the answer to that is sure. I'm all for it. We should be gaming as much as we possibly can. Having said that, it is just a game. And if we were playing Uno every week and no one was having fun playing Uno, we would find something else to do. The fact that it's a role-playing game instill because there is a different level of interaction and a different level of investment in it, especially for the GM. I think we assign too high importance on, well, we have to continue this. It's the only way and the answer is it's not. It's a game. You could just as well pack it up and walk out as you can a game of Monopoly, as a game of cards, whatever. You don't have to slog through. If it's not giving you anything, then maybe it's time to consider what else you could be doing with that time and effort. This is not a call for the Tabletop Family Dad or anyone else to give up their game. It's just saying that I think quite often, because of the nature of tabletop role playing, we assign a greater importance to the continuity of the game than there actually is. And though it's wonderful to have these long lasting, powerful games where people, remember that time in high school when you ran that 5-year D&D campaign? Yes, I do. And I've been chasing that dragon for 40 years now. But the answer is just a game. We could start a new one tomorrow. Done. If you aren't getting anything out of it or your players aren't getting anything out of it, rethink. Next thought is very simple. You can ask everybody, do you want to continue doing this? Are you okay? Are we okay with this? Are you having any fun? Is there something I should be doing to make it more fun? Just a simple conversation. I would just have that direct conversation. Go, look, guys, if you're on your phones or whatever, it doesn't make me feel good. Are we doing this or not? If you don't want to do it, just tell me and we'll pack it up and go. I would have that conversation before just bagging the game. But there are lots of times, lots of stories, lots of anecdotal internet stories where the GM feels bad about the game. Everyone else thinks it's going fine. So there is that mismatch of perception. A lot of that comes from that first point I made, which is that the GM feels responsible. You've bought into that responsibility, and sometimes people don't know the energy they're putting off. And so your kid might pull out his phone and doesn't know that sort of stabs you in the gut. He thinks he's still listening and paying attention. You think he's checked out. There's a mismatch of perceptions there. I think the last point I want to make before I sign off is I go through this every couple months. I go through the exact same feeling that this guy has every couple of months, regardless of how well the game's going. The funny part is, in my GMing career, I'll put that in air quotes, has lasted for 45 years. 44 years. 45 years. Done. Don't do math on stream, kids. Don't. Between 4 and 5 decades. Somewhere in the vicinity of... and I still, let me the games that I have run in the past 2 to 3 years, let's say 2 to 4 years, oh God, I don't know, the past 5 years have been the best games that I have run in my in my mind. They have been the tightest, most clever, best structured, most engaging, blah blah blah, right? Best characters, best stories, best whatever campaigns that I have run. There's a few high peaks back in the, all throughout, but these have consistently been generally the best, if that makes any sense, right? The peaks may not be as high, the valleys not as low, but they are trending up, and it is generally getting better all throughout, night to night, week to week. And yet, I still feel the same way that this guy does every couple months. Man, should we be doing something different? Should I be doing something different? Should we be playing something different? Man, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. This is a lot of effort, and I'm not sure that anyone's getting enough out of this to justify that kind of effort, right? It's the same thing. I go through the same thing every couple months anyway. A lot of this, a lot of it's going to be internal. I swear to you, a lot of this is internal. I think a lot. I mean, they talk about in tech jobs and in programming the imposter syndrome, where you can be successful but still think, man, I am not as good. I'm not as good as I need to be, or actually, I suck at this. And I think it's because I do think GMing, in a lot of ways, we tend to focus on the negative parts, or the shitty parts, or the slow bits, or the bits where someone pulls their phone out, and we don't do a good job of focusing on the successes. And so I think that leads to this malaise, this imposter syndrome, this, every couple months I'm thinking, man, I should just trash this all and move on and go to the next thing because this thing hasn't worked out. I, I, there's no answer to that. That is a psychology. I think it goes hand in hand with actually, in a lot of cases, being a GM. I think you will. I mean, how about this? I obviously don't know if all GMs feel this, but I bet you there's a certain type of GM which feels this way periodically or all the time, and you just fight through it. Or you're changing games every 2 months, or you're changing campaigns every 2 months, or you're taking a break every 6 months because you can't get the energy to do your prep. You have to. This is just something you have to go. You have to stop and go, is this me or is this reality? And a lot of times it's going to be you. And when it is you, you just got to say, well, self, shut the hell up. I got a game to prep or whatever, and just fight through it. And for me, the biggest salve to this feeling, this uh, uh, gnawing at me, is to just get to the table. There's one gnat, and it's just like in my vision. So if I'm starting to clap, I'm not applauding myself. I'm trying to kill this one freaking bug that is floating across my vision. For me, the biggest salve is getting to the table. If I can get through that prep, not cancel the game, and just get to the table, then once you get to the table, then sort of the wheels turn, the rust shakes off or whatever, and you just start going into presenter mode, and it works out for me. That's sort of what I just always, when I have that feeling, go, let's just see how it goes. And usually it goes okay. And then I'm okay again for the next week, I hope. So that's it. This went a little longer than I expected, so I do apologize for that. I will post a link to this guy's video. I think it's an interesting video. I feel bad because it does seem like he wants to do good, but sort of, but struggles. And I felt the same things. Good luck.